There's a lot of mystery surrounding Al Qaeda in the very beginning stages of the group itself. Very few people um, talk about the beginning structure, the initial formation of this group. In this video, I'm going to talk about the beginning history of Al Qaeda and how this organization formed and where they got their ideas from. Near by the year 1986, Osama bin Laden had allowed two scouts. One of the names is Shafiq, and the other one has a weird name. I forgot about it, but they went out and went into Afghanistan. They found this area, which was not a very strategically important area, but it was nearby a very strategic area called Jaji in Afghanistan. And so what bin Laden wanted was a training grounds for Arab fighters. This was not initially international terrorist organization at first. That wasn't the initial idea. And if you are able to download the Tariq and Osama documents, just Google Tariq and Osama documents. It's in Arabic, but there are documents of the initial stages of Al Qaeda that was found in the Balkans in the year 2000. And so the creation of this camp, which was important in bin Laden's eyes because the Arabs were not a very influential reason as to why the Afghans had won the war. The Arabs had minimal participation, and bin Laden noticed this. And plus, he was dissatisfied with the Maktab al-Khidmat, which was the Afghan Services Bureau headed by Abdullah Azam, Abdullah Anas, Wael Juladdin, in which Azam saw the conflict more in the way of a spiritual one, in which he was trying to educate foreign Arabs regarding spiritual matters as to why the jihad was taking place. And so there were rules and regulations with Azam in which bin Laden over time grew dissatisfied with where the organization was heading, in which he wanted to create his own organization, his own camp, which was named al-Masada, which in English is Lion's Den. After 1987, the camp itself had very few members, approximately 50 to 75 members, where they would swear bayat or loyalty to bin Laden. There were documents and files. This organization actually was very constructive. It had documents where new members were to give their name, where they were from, what skills they possessed, because al-Masada was actually an organization built for military. It was a military construct that was basically going to be the forefront of that area, which was Arab-oriented, which was unheard of because the Afghans were the forefront of the war. The Arabs were very minimal. And so under the protection of Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, who is the lead commander of Pakistan and in Peshawar, he was actually given some Afghan military soldiers to watch over the al-Masada camp because at the initial stages, the Arabs building the camp weren't armed. And so later on, bin Laden's construction company, his financial background was huge. And so the Egyptians, the Takfiris, the real apostates of Islam, which they're called Takfiris, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abu Hafs al-Masri, who would later be renamed Mohamed Atef, the military commanders. These were real organizers. people that were military literate, whereas bin Laden was not. And so, while the al-Masada camp was growing under the financial backing of bin Laden, the Egyptians and the Arabs were military training these foreign Arabs into the camp. And so in 1989, the camp had lost its luster. However, bin Laden had called for a retreat of the camp because the camp itself wasn't a very military strategic camp as Jaji was. And so what happened was a couple of Arabs actually stood at the camp. And this is important because while the majority of the Arabs retreated back into Pakistan, the remaining Arabs stood at this camp. And so the Soviets were in the middle of retreating, however, attacked this camp. And so approximately 200 Spetznaz soldiers, special forces soldiers, attacked the camp. Meanwhile, the Arabs were basically didn't have much in the way of weapons, and there was approximately maybe 25 or 30 of them, and they defeated them, even some with their bare hands. It's the story itself is underreported, but it is reported in a book that I'm currently reading, which is Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, which is authored by Ann Stenmerson, which I recommend. The book is fantastic so far. And so because of this, the rumors began to spread about this resounding, remarkable defeat of the special forces of the Soviets, in which where this illusion of this special group of Arab soldiers, these foreign Arabs, al-Masada, now became al-Qaeda. But the name itself, which is the base, was from this battle, this base, al-Masada was from, in which the military literate soldiers, these soldiers, had defeated this military might of the Soviet special forces soldiers. So this was huge. And so bin Laden's name now began to ring out through the Valley of Peshawar, Jalalabad, Islamabad, even Afghanistan. You know, the Afghans themselves were remarkably reluctant to give Arabs any credit, and rightfully so. The Arabs performed very little in the war, but this was huge. And this was a big idea because what happened was there was a battle, the Battle of Jalalabad, in which many Afghans, including the full backing of the Pakistan ISI, led by the President Abdul Haq al-Haq, and the Pakistan ISI General Hamid Gul, who promised that Jalalabad would be free of the communists, and the communist Afghanistan regime basically slaughtered them. In fact, approximately 5,000 to 6,000 Afghans were lost in this battle, and Hamid Gul was basically deposed, and so was ul-Haq, Zia-ul-Haq, the president, led by the Prime Minister. Benazir Bhutto was basically embarrassed for the loss, and ul-Haq and Hamid Gul were basically deposed from their positions. And so this was a big idea. And so with the win of the lines at al-Masada, they relocated back into Nagar in Afghanistan, which is in south of the valley. And so when now with the Arabs there, they basically got into another battle, a huge battle with the communist regime, and they won again. And so now the rumors began to spread about this special group of Arab, this group from that was basically called al-Masada, now became al-Qaeda, which is the base. And that base, the nickname, came from al-Masada. And so you had foreign Arabs that were now drawn to this group. And so individuals like Enam Aranut, Wael Juladdin, Mahmoud Salim, Abu Banshiri, Abu Banshiri, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri, Abu Hafs al-Masri, lots of Egyptians, Abu al-Iraqi. These are very important names because these were the primary members, and Dr. Fadl, Ayman al-Sharif, radicalists from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad that basically created the Shura Council, the religious council in al-Qaeda, which pertained to religious matters, military matters that were led by Abu al-Banshiri and Abu Hafs al-Masri, Egyptians and Saudis, and were getting money, not just from bin Laden, but also from Saudi Arabia, private donors that had a close affiliation with bin Laden because of his family background and the Saudi bin Laden group. Now, I know there's this conspiracy about the CIA funneling this group, or that bin Laden was called Tim Osman. This is unfounded. It's ridiculous, by the way. According to Ayman al-Zawahiri, he wrote a book, Under the Prophet's Banner, Nights Under the Prophet's Banner, in which he basically states that the Americans spread these conspiracy theories as far back as the 90s. Regarding that bin Laden was a spy, or that bin Laden was handled by intelligence agencies. Ayman al-Zawahiri's own words was that no money from the CIA went directly to bin Laden. Not to say that when the CIA was funneling money and funding to the Maktab al-Kidmat, which was true because they were funneling money not just in Peshawar, but to the only office in the United States was the Al-Farouk office in New York. Even Abdullah Anas, who was one of the primary founders of the MAC office, basically states that you had many NGOs, which were non-government organizations, funneling money. And not to say that the CIA basically trickle-down effect, which found its way into bin Laden's pockets. That's basically feasible. But direct funding, there's no evidence for it. And so the initial stages of al-Qaeda then went from Afghanistan and stood there. While in 1992, bin Laden went back into Saudi Arabia because the Soviets had retreated. And now the rumor was that the Iraqi Ba'athist regime, who invaded Kuwait, was basically going to invade Saudi Arabia. That was the rumor spread by the United States, in which Soviet air photography showed that there was no invading army into Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi kingdom basically was afraid because they're not military literate. They didn't have much of in the way of an army. And so they were holding a high-level meeting with Prince Turki al-Faisal, who was head of the Saudi intelligence group, the GID, the General Intelligence Directorate, and many of, and of course, the Saudi King Fahd al Saud, and bin Laden through Turki bin Faisal. He basically wanted to attend the meeting and propose an alternative in which he would use the Mujahideen themselves and members of his group, the al-Masada lines then, al-Qaeda. And they weren't basically called al-Qaeda at that point, although the rumors was that in the documents, there was the name al-Qaeda used in these documents. So, but I'm talking about the usual name, the term in which the American media termed al-Qaeda. That wasn't in existence yet. And how would they know? Because they wouldn't, because the beginning stages was happening at this point right now. And they weren't an international terrorist organization up until this point. They were basically a select group of Arabs that were going to defend Afghanistan. That was basically it. And so this is the reason why I wanted to make this video, to make sure to show you that al-Qaeda went through stages. And so bin Laden went before to the kingdom, basically proposed this idea in which King Fahd basically was found it absurd. And so he basically said no, but he was afraid of bin Laden, and he heard about the stories about what happened in Afghanistan with the Spetznaz soldiers, and with in southern Afghanistan, where he basically defeated a faction of the communist Afghans. So he basically took this group as serious. Plus, there was Afghan Arabs in different groups like the Haqqani Network and the Hizb Islami, backed by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. And so they house arrested bin Laden. And according to Peter Lance, in his book, 1,000 Years for Revenge, there was a secret backdoor meeting in which Prince Turki Al Faisal went to bin Laden under his home in Riyadh and basically states that they would unfreeze his assets because the kingdom froze his passport, froze his assets. But Prince Turki Al Faisal said, I speak for the king, in which we will give you back your passport and assets, but you can't reside inside the country. And so bin Laden actually sent delegates to Sudan. Sudan is basically a country that didn't, one of the few countries, and probably the only country that didn't require a passport for foreign Arabs to enter the country. And so they sent delegates over to the Sudan to meet with National Islamic Front leader Hassan al-Turabi, in which they met him. And Turabi basically was very warm to the reception of bin Laden. He knew about bin Laden, knew about his financial background, and basically invited bin Laden to the country. And that's where bin Laden was. He brought about his construction magnates and his construction firm to build housing, to build businesses inside the country. So bin Laden spent millions of dollars in his country. And while doing so, he built training camps there, headed by Abu Hafs al-Masri, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri. He had a recruitment office where Wael al-Juladin and, of course, other Arabs would basically head about his recruitment office. Ayman al-Zawahiri came along with the Takfiris of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and they basically manipulated bin Laden into creating that enemy, which was the United States, in which Ayman al-Zawahiri proposed a paper in which he would create two enemies, that there were two enemies, the near enemy and the far enemy. The near enemy was the Arab governments, in which the near enemy basically was when this group was in Afghanistan, that the primary agenda for al-Masada was to depose secular Arab governments and have Islamic Sharia-based governments into Afghanistan, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon. And so little by little, they would create. They didn't care very much for, and this is bin Laden. Bin Laden's initial commentary in the late 80s, early 90s, before he went to the Sudan, was for to create an Islamic caliphate within the Middle East. He didn't want to expand because he didn't have the logistics there. He wasn't manipulated into creating this organization into a terrorist organization until the Egyptians came. Ayman al-Zawahiri, al-Sharif, whose nickname was Dr. Fadl, in which these Takfiris and their hatred for anything West, and these ideas came from previous authors, Sayyid Qutb, for example, in which they wanted to create not just a caliphate in the Middle East, but a caliphate worldwide. And so while he was in the Sudan, according to Abdullah Nas and other people, Jamal al-Fadl, who became a primary financial al-Qaeda handler, who basically became an informant for the United States government. It was the first informant and was the first person to give a breakdown to the FBI about al-Qaeda. And so Wadi al-Hajj, who was a prominent member regarding in the Sudan about the recruitment offices and the financial offices as well, who basically also was given testimony in the Jamal al-Fadl case against bin Laden, but he basically was involved with the 1998 East Africa bombings, and he was given a life sentence for it. But these individuals basically broke down where the Bin Laden was different than he was in Afghanistan. When he went to the Sudan, where he was away from everybody, and he was surrounded by these very manipulative and dangerous Egyptians, they persuaded Bin Laden to create the far enemy being Israel and the United States and the West. And this is actually documented in Ayman al-Zawahiri's book, Nights Under the Prophet's Banner, where he creates two enemies, the near enemy and the far enemy. And so in 1990, and I won't expound it, but in 1996, Bin Laden gave a fatwa. And the fatwa was dedicated to the United States military in Saudi Arabia and the kingdom. Okay? Still at this point, they were not a terrorist organization, international terrorist organization. It wasn't until 1998, 97, 98, where they became this, where Bin Laden became fully immersed into this takfiri jihadi mentality, in which he initially wasn't. That's the basis of my video today. I'm going to end it there because after this, we basically have covered, I have into multitude of articles and videos showing that Bin Laden became an international terrorist. But there are very few videos and very few articles showing where Al-Qaeda came from, where Bin Laden's mentality was in the early stages of the early 80s and the early 90s. And so I'm going to end it there. I think I've said enough, and I'll see you in the next video.